Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. Since I've shared my favorite books with you a few times and it seems like a lot of you appreciated that, I thought that I would share with you my favorite books about homeschooling today. You know me, when it comes to reading, I read everything there is to know about education. I read about the history of education, I read about how children learn, I read about different homeschooling styles, and today I'm going to be focusing specifically on homeschooling books. So while I have often recommended to you books by John Taylor Gatto on the history of education, you're not going to hear any of those today because I really do want to try just to stick with those books that will tell those of you who are newer to homeschooling more about what homeschooling is, homeschooling methods, maybe some techniques that you might want to try, and it might even be a good refresher for those of you moms who have been homeschooling a while and would just like some new ideas or just need to feel rejuvenated. And honestly, that's why I reread homeschooling books every so often, is because it really does rejuvenate me. So now, the books that I'm going to be talking about today are books that I have in my personal library. There are two books, however, that I could not find as I was gathering all of my homeschooling books, so I'm going to tell you about those first. So when I'm talking about the homeschooling books, they're not in any particular order from like best to worst or anything. These are all really good books, no particular order, but I'm going to start with the two that I don't have on my pile so that I don't forget them. The first one is Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie. That book is a quick read. It's really great for a newer homeschool mom or for a homeschool mom who is just feeling like she's on the verge of burnout, or you feel like you just can't do it anymore, or maybe you feel like you've taken too much on. Teaching from Rest alleviates that, and it really helps you to get to the bottom of what homeschooling really is all about. And homeschooling is relational, and it's something that, you know, if you're a Christian, we really do need to depend on God when it comes to that, and that's where that teaching from rest comes from, because we know that God's got this. So I highly recommend Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie. The other book that I cannot find is For the Children's Sake. That book is it's a really great synopsis of a Charlotte Mason type of learning. And Charlotte Mason, if you don't know much about her, she was really about living books and copy work and nature studies, a very natural way for kids to learn, something that is pretty different from what you see in a traditional school setting. So For the Children's Sake is a really good summary of what Charlotte Mason learning is all about. So now, as for the books that I actually could find today, I'm going to start with Sandra Dodd's Big Book of Unschooling. Now, I have to say that I do not agree 100% with everything that Sandra Dodd has to say. She is not a believer, so she does have some stances on certain areas that I really don't jive well with. But I'm one of those people who firmly believes that you should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And this is one of those instances where there are so many great gems of information in here and just ideas. Even if you're not going to be a homeschool or an unschooler all the time, even if it's something that maybe you just want to learn more about, or maybe you are thinking about trying it over a break, it will really help you to let go of that idea of what you think learning has to look like, especially if you're kind of stuck in that school mold. So the next one is Free to Learn, 5 Ideas for a Joyful Unschooling Life. And this is by Pam Laricchia. And yeah, so this is right along the lines of the Big Book of Unschooling. And same thing with Pam Laricchia. I don't think that she's a believer, so I don't always completely agree with everything that she has to say, but in itself, the book is one of those ways it really does help you to change your paradigm. And she uses that word a lot. It helps you to change your paradigm of what learning looks like, what natural learning looks like. And again, this is just a really quick read. And you're going to find that I do have a few unschooling books in my pile here because it's something that I really do lean towards. We as a family cannot do all out unschooling because we just need that bit of structure that we get from relaxed homeschooling, but I do incorporate a lot of unschooling methods into our homeschool. And so these have really helped me to shape the idea of, you know, what it is that we want to be covering in our school and how. So now, and I have to say that a lot of these books are ratty because remember, this is my 12th year homeschooling, and some of them were given to me like right when we first started homeschooling, and they were pre-owned like by other people, and this is one of them. So the Homeschooling Handbook, this one I really like. It is, it's a good look at the different homeschooling methods. It tells you about what, like a school at home style learning is, not like online schooling. That's typically what we refer to as school at home now. But before so many people were doing that, what school at home meant was just like a textbook style of learning in your homeschool. So it tells you about that. It tells you about unschooling. It tells you about eclectic or relaxed homeschooling. It tells you about unschooling. Did I say that already? It talks about unit studies, and on top of that, on top of telling you what each homeschooling method is about, it gives you little anecdotal stories of how people use these different methods. And that's, even though that's something that's great for beginner homeschoolers, I like to reread through it again because I get inspiration from it. So here is another unschooling book, Finding Joy, A Christian's Journey to an Unschooled Life. This is by Julie Palenko. I really like this book because a lot of times in unschooling circles, a lot of the beliefs really don't fit well with a Christian worldview in certain areas. So that's why I really appreciate this book. Now, I do have to say that from what she talks about in this, I would probably consider her more of a relaxed homeschooler because she does have table time with her kids. So, that's not something that is normally done in an unschool. Is that a word? Anyway, in an unschooling atmosphere, you don't typically know of like a routine table time. But you know what? I'm not putting this down because I'm a relaxed homeschooler. I'm just saying that I think this fits more in line with what I would think of relaxed homeschooling than with unschooling, but it is still a great book. Okay, so next we have PassionDriven Education by Connor Boyack, and this has a foreword by John Taylor Gatto. And Connor Boyack is actually the author of the Tuttle Twins series. If you have not ever looked into those, I highly recommend them. I have all of them. I recommend that you buy them for your children. It will really help them to understand how government really works, and it not the nonsense that they teach in school nowadays. Now, what I like about this book is that it leans towards unschooling. It is about taking a child's interest, like something that they have a passionate interest about, hence passion-driven education, and just focusing all of their education around that. Like if your child is intensely focused on trains, you would find a way for them to learn about trains and learn their history, and then find out how trains work and do that with science. Maybe go to visit a freight yard and do everything, like take a ride at a like a train yard, take a ride there. They could learn math, maybe doing speeds or learning how they lay down the railroad ties. There's so many different things, and it's actually, now that I think of it, it's also very much like a unit study. And a lot of times when I do unit studies, I will pick like a topic ahead of time that, I think my kids would enjoy. But with this is more kind of like, it's not really something that they would pick ahead of time for their child. They kind of just follow their child's interests and take off from there. Now, the only thing with this is that I have found that although I love the ideas in this book, I think it would be harder for someone with a really big family, like my size, to kind of put this into action in their homeschool, because you have to be very spontaneous with these things, but it also takes a lot of planning, and you have to be really, really resourceful about figuring out how to teach all the subjects with those interests. So even though it's a great idea for kids, if you have a lot of kids, it might be hard as a parent to kind of shuffle all that around, but I still do recommend that you read it. In the beginning, he also goes into the history of education, so that in itself makes this book a gem. Okay, so next is Learning All the Time by John Holt. This is not specifically a homeschooling book. I was not going to include it just because it doesn't specifically speak about homeschooling, but this really is the book that shaped my entire homeschooling philosophy. It completely changed the way that I look at learning. So I really recommend this to any parent who is getting out there, who is starting to homeschool, or if you feel that maybe your kids aren't flourishing in your homeschool, if they're getting bored, this is a great book for you to read. And I'm actually thinking of rereading it again because it's been a couple years since I read it last. So next is Educating the Wholehearted Child, and it talks about discipleship, whole books, and real life, wholehearted Christian home education for ages 4 to 14. And I really like that this is another one of those books that is really about relational homeschooling, but there is, a Christ-centered focus on the homeschooling in this book. There are so many different ideas, and like it said, for the different age levels. And this is actually written by Sally Clarkson and her husband Clay Clarkson. So you know that it's going to have some good content in it. Another book that I highly recommend. All right, so next we have the Unschooling Handbook. This is written by the same author as the Homeschooling Handbook. This is another one. It's a wreck. So yeah, my kids have had their hands on it more than once. The Unschooling Handbook is written by Mary Griffith. And she is actually the one who wrote the Homeschooling Handbook as well. And the Unschooling Handbook, like the Homeschooling Handbook, has a lot of anecdotal stories of how people incorporated unschooling into their homes. And I think that it's a really good look that unschooling can look very, very different from one house to another. A lot of times we think of certain homeschooling styles as being that they should be similar from house to house, but they really aren't. And this is this is the most true, I should say, with unschooling, because there are so many different ways that your kids are going to approach learning because they are all individuals. I also like that this book does get into the legalities of unschooling. A lot of people are afraid to use unschooling because of their state's requirements. And did you hear that? All my books just fell down the side of my desk. Anyway, unschooling is a legal homeschooling alternative in all 50 states. So this does talk about those legalities in the back of this book. So next I have Teach Your Own, the John Holt Book of Homeschooling. So yeah, this is by John Holt, the one who wrote Learning All the Time that I spoke of. So as much as I talk about John Taylor Gatto when it comes to me like kind of being red-pilled about education, John Holt was the one who more or less red-pilled me about how kids actually learn and how different it is from what they use in schools. So this book is a phenomenal read. He was actually one of the pioneers of homeschooling. He's the one who really kind of put it into the forefront. He actually called it unschooling. Now, when he referred to unschooling, he referred to, I think, a different way, not completely like what unschooling is nowadays. A lot of unschooling is like, no curriculum stuff. Some of them do. No textbooks, completely child-led. But his philosophy was that unschooling was just using letting your child take the lead as much as the parent can bear. So like it's okay for a parent to step in if they feel that they need to. That was his philosophy. And the reason that he used the term unschooling is just because he wanted it to be as little like school as possible. And so I wish that I would have highlighted it, but in this book there's a quote where he just basically says, for heaven's sake, don't go out there and buy textbooks and curriculum like you would find in a school. Why do you have your kids home with you if you're just going to do what they're doing in school? And so I really, and of course I'm not as eloquent as he is, but I really agree with what he has to say with that. He just really, I think that he made my kids' learning environment so much happier than if I just would have been depending on what I thought I knew about how kids learn. Okay, so now this next one is not specifically, okay, it is about homeschooling, but it is about a specific technique. It's about notebooking. And if you've been to my channel before, you know that I like notebooking. So this one is Notebooking, Yes, You Can Be a Binder Queen by Cindy Rushton. This book, the first time that I got it, I was looking into notebooking for the first time. I wasn't really sure how to do it, and I found this book on Instagram and I read through it, and can I tell you that when I was done, I probably finished this book in like a day, maybe 2 days. As you can see, it's a quick read, but I was so excited about starting notebooking because I got so many ideas from this book. So I actually did do a review on this book. I'll leave a link in the description box, and I will leave links to all of the books that I'm talking about today. So, you know, if you want to take a look, if you want to get a closer look at one of them, I'm going to leave Amazon links in my description box for all of these books. But if you want ideas for notebooking, this is the book you want to get. I'm telling you, I found it on Amazon. I know that Cindy Rushton does have her own website too, so if you can't find it on Amazon, I would check there as well. She's also on Instagram. Okay, and the last book that I have here is Free Range Learning, How Homeschooling Changes Everything. And this is by Laura Grace Weldon. And this is just another one of those books that it's very unschooling oriented, but it really gives you so many ideas on how unschooling works, what you can do with unschooling, how to incorporate certain things. And again, it gives those anecdotal stories of how people have made it work for themselves. And I think that the anecdotes are my favorite parts of these books. I like to see how people have actually put it into practice. I like to see their experience. I like to see what worked for people, what didn't work for people. I like to see the ideas, you know, the ingenuity that they come up with. Like all of these right here, those are all anecdotes. So this is another book that I recommend. And again, I will leave this in the description box, a link for it. Anyway, that's all the books that I can think of that are my absolute favorites. And like I said, those two that I can't find, they're in the house somewhere. But as I was collecting them, I don't know, sometimes my kids use my books to like as little tables when they draw, and then they'll take it up to their room, and I'll be finding my books in their room. That's probably where they are right now. But anyway, those will be down in the description box as well. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram because YouTube disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.